Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Reedy. I'm representing the Strategic Studies Department here at JSAL. Today, we'll be pleased to present a conversation with a distinguished guest, including audience Q&A. This session is unclassified and will be recorded and posted to the JSAL network. Keep in mind that the views, opinions expressed by all participants do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the U.S. government, Department of Defense, or SOCOM. If you have feedback or questions after this session, email thinkjsal@socom.mil as indicated on the slide. Today's moderator is Mr. Kerry Roberts, Outreach Faculty here at JSAL. He will introduce the program and today's guest.
Hello and good day to everyone. My name is Kerry Roberts, and I want to welcome everyone to another Think JSAL online interview that explores research and publications of JSAL faculty, resident senior fellows, leading academics, and the wider SOF and international security community. Today, we welcome Dr. Martin van Creveld. Dr. van Creveld is Professor Emeritus of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He has written many books on military history, strategy, and theory with a special interest in the future of war. Long before there was a focus on hybrid or irregular warfare in international defense and intellectual circles, Dr. van Creveld advanced his concept of non-trinitarian warfare. Many of his works, including A History of Strategy, Command in War, Supplying War, The Transformation of War, The Rise and Decline of the State, Countering Modern Terrorism, and The Culture of War, are staples of war colleges and military institutions of higher learning worldwide. Dr. van Creveld, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you. So I'd like to start off by asking about the nature of warfare today. So many of your works approach strategy from an historical perspective. In ancient and medieval societies, martial virtues such as honor and discipline were seen as a key to victory. In more recent history, rapid deployment, maneuver, superior technology are cited as the key. In your opinion, what is the key to victory in the information age and in the era of hybrid warfare today?
Look, as long as war remains a dangerous activity, an activity in which some people die and others are injured, an activity in which sacrifice is needed, there's no question that the military values will remain the same as they have always been. There's nothing that changes them whatsoever. War as a human activity is eternal.
Okay, so these principles you talk about, they are immutable. In other words, regardless of the technology or the nature of the conflict, those same immutable qualities are the key to victory.
I think so. I think that technology is actually much overrated. If you look at the history of war since 1945, you see that in almost all cases when poor third world underdeveloped countries or movements faced first-class Western powers, including, of course, also the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, in almost all cases, and we're talking about several hundreds of them, the forces, the regular forces of the West, for all their power, for all their money, for all their technology, for all their training, for all their this and for all their that, they almost always lost, okay? And you can see what happened to the West as a result. In 1945, the West was dominant. The West, meaning above all the United States, dominated most of the world, right? Most of Africa, most of Asia were under Western military power. By 1965, almost nothing of this was left. And not because the colonial powers, including the United States for this purpose, wanted to give up, but because they were defeated. They were defeated time and time and time again, even though they had every advantage on their side in technological terms. Okay, so I would argue myself that technology, the role of technology has been vastly overrated. Okay, that people have been looking for technology to do things that technology cannot do. Namely to substitute for the most elementary values in war, which are fighting power, which are honor, which are the will to win, which are persistence, which are determination, which are the will to sacrifice, and if necessary, to die. All of those have been available, plentifully so, in the third world, okay? All of those have almost disappeared from the so-called first world. And the outcome, you know, is for anybody to see the color of the globe has changed.
Okay, stark lesson for us indeed. So my next question has to do with your concept of non-trinitarian warfare. So you're widely considered a non-trinitarian, deeply skeptical of a Clausewitzian approach to military affairs. So in your view, has the so-called Clausewitzian trinity, has that ever been relevant to warfare, or is the conduct of modern warfare simply made it less relevant?
I think that the most important factor governing modern warfare are nuclear weapons. Many people don't like, especially military people, don't like talking about nuclear weapons. If I may tell a little anecdote from my time at the National Defense University, which admittedly is now about 35 years ago, okay, I was on the faculty there. And every few weeks you would have a seminar. And in the seminar, there would be, excuse me for being a little bit disrespectful, a bunch of colonels and lieutenant colonels. And they would sit around the table and say something like, now suppose the big bad Russians invade the poor, weak Europeans. What do we, big, good Americans, do to save them? And then the Colonel X would say so-and-so, and Colonel Y would say so-and-so. And this would go on for about 10 minutes. And then suddenly, or not so suddenly, someone would say, yes, sir, but what about nuclear weapons, okay? And then they would look at each other, and of course they all hated it because it was the end of the war and the end of the discussion. Okay, so nuclear weapons are the #1 factor that distinguishes modern warfare, if you will, the modern world for whatever happened before 1945. You could, in my view, compare nuclear weapons to the most important inventions in the whole of history. The invention of fire, the invention of writing, the invention of agriculture. Nuclear weapons are on par with those, maybe more important. Because you see, previous inventions drove history forward. Nuclear weapons, in a certain sense, drove it backward. We are in some ways returning straight to the Middle Ages. Okay? Here is something that is absolutely precedented. Nuclear weapons have prevented any two powers that take each other seriously from fighting each other. Okay? All the rest is, in a certain sense, only peanuts. Okay? Only peanuts. So war has taken a 180-degree turn. It's in many ways returning to its origins. And forget about the technology. We are going back to a kind of war that existed before there were regular armies, before there were large units, before there was high technology. Instead, more and more, what you find is guerrillas, terrorists, okay? Terrorism, as in a sense, it says it has conquered the earth, okay? It has conquered the earth. Instead of becoming more sophisticated, in some ways, it's becoming less sophisticated. And instead of becoming more, less manpower intensive, it's becoming more power intensive. And instead of, I could go on and on and on. That is the way I see the development happening.
Okay, so one of our audience participants has a question. about grand strategy. In particular, he cites two prominent strategists, military theorists, John Lewis Gaddis and Colin Gray. So which side of the debate do you fall on in terms of grand strategy? This is grand strategy is necessary or it's unnecessary?
Grand strategy in the sense that it incorporates not just war, but other factors, including economics, including society, including culture, including politics and so on. In that sense, grand strategy is certainly as relevant as it has always been.
Okay. Looking at like what we call in America, the dime, diplomatic, information, military, economic, those are the four elements of national power. You take all those into account when you're employing grand strategy.
Yeah, well, some others would add other things as well, but it doesn't matter. What you have to realize, and what I think most of us realize, is that military power alone is not enough. Military power on its own is a blind and blunt instrument. What you want is, if at all possible, perfect coordination with of military power with the other elements, and that specifically includes cultural values as well.
Okay, so I'd like to pivot off a comment you made earlier about in terms of my next question. So you mentioned that guerrillas, terrorists have taken over the earth in terms of modern warfare. They're driving modern warfare. However, we've seen Russia and China in particular in the past 20 years successfully execute irregular or hybrid warfare campaigns. We see a lot of Russian activity in Eastern Europe. So would you argue, or would you argue against the notion that the state is reemerging in terms of importance? Should we take into account that leg of Clausewitz's trinity, the state, as we prepare for the hybrid wars of the future?
Look, I am not aware of either the Russians or Russian military or the Chinese military bursting, over their borders with tanks and cannon and this and that and taking over foreign countries. It's just not happening. What I see is something very different. Actually, as far as China is concerned, we see very little happening, okay? But as far as Russia is concerned, what you see is not the huge Soviet military overrunning the Ukraine or any other country. What you see them is fomenting rebellions in other countries and giving them assistance. So it seems to me that this fits my thesis perfectly well, okay? It's hard to see in the last few dozen years, it's hard to find a really large conventional war. Maybe the last war of this kind was the Iran-Iraq war. Okay, and then if you will, then the first Gulf War. But apart from that, war has becoming smaller and been becoming smaller and smaller. Armed forces have been becoming smaller. Okay, if you look at the United States, in the United States, in World War II, you mobilized about almost 10%, about 10% of your population, okay? Look at it today, only just over 1%, maybe 1.5% or so of your population are under arms at any one time. And the percentages are going down all the time. And the same is happening in other countries.
Okay, so let's talk about your book, Command and War. In your book, you argue, despite the vast changes in thinking and technology in terms of warfare, the constant that has most contributed to victory has been ascertaining accurate information about the state and intentions of enemy forces, and then the ability to make crucial decisions with minimal information. So my question is, when you look at the advent of real-time, what we call ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance with drones, satellites, and then the advent of the internet, social media, has this made the pursuit of certainty about enemy capabilities and intent easier or harder for commanders? Is there such thing as too much information?
Look, that is true. but maybe I should put it like this. War by definition is the province of uncertainty. It's the province of uncertainty because the other side is doing anything it can to make sure it is the province of uncertainty. And I don't think that technology, any kind of technology, is capable of of eliminating that uncertainty. If it could eliminate uncertainty, then there would be war. Okay, by definition, because war, by definition, is waged on the basis of uncertainty. And since it is based on the basis of waged on the basis of uncertainty, it requires the qualities that you need in order to deal with uncertainty. And those are unchanging as far as I can see. Nothing has changed since the first cavemen used stealth in order to attack the other, his neighbor cavemen. And the present. Uncertainty is always there, always has been there, always will be there, okay? And again, suppose you can eliminate uncertainty, then war will go with it.
Okay, so my next question is about our current U.S. national security strategy. So the strategy that's been published emphasizes a transition from counter-violent extremist organization, which has been our dominant focus since September 11th, a terrorist attack, and fighting Al-Qaeda, to one of great power competition. That's the buzzword today. Great power competition, of course, regarding China and Russia, our two principal near-peer competitors. So in your mind, how would you recommend the U.S. best employs our forces in this grand strategy, this shift to great power competition?
Well, look back at the Cold War, okay? The Cold War, we're going back to the Cold War. And many of the factors that were relevant to the Cold War are being reintroduced. But don't forget one thing, the Cold War was always cold, okay? It was always a Cold War. So you might say, welcome, new Cold War, okay? It means no one was ever killed in the Cold War. How wonderful.
So we're in a new Cold War. A multipolar Cold War with Russia and China?
Yes, and I don't see why not actually, except that as far as I can see, the United States has been, under President Trump, has been doing quite its best in order to antagonize both of them, which is very foolish. Okay, you should try as far as you can have allies, not alienate your allies. And as far as I can see, President Trump promised to improve relations with President Putin. It didn't work very well. He promised to improve relations with China. It didn't work very well. So everybody is on the heels of everybody else.
You see Russia and China align against this?
Maybe what you in the United States need is somebody like Kissinger, who back in 1972 said, we cannot fight Russia and China simultaneously. We have to make an alliance with one of them, okay? So that would be my advice. Try to see whether you cannot make it and strike an alliance with one of the three against the third.
Okay.
One of the
That's about as good an answer as any to that. That's a very difficult question, admittedly. That's a very good an answer as I could envision. So my next question is about organization for combat. So how do you think militaries will change their organization, their battle order, in terms of capabilities for the modern era, 2020 and beyond?
Well, it's already been happening. We've already said that armed forces are shrinking, but it's not only armed forces that are shrinking, it is also the units themselves that are shrinking. What are the chances of the United States ever again sending 4 million people to the other side of the world as it did in World War II? Answer is none whatsoever, as far as I can see. Okay, so everything is going to be downsized. And this has been going on for a very, very long time. Look, there was a time when the United States bought more aircraft, manufactured more aircraft every day than it now buys in a year. Okay, I'm not exaggerating. During World War II, 1944, you manufactured at peak 100,000 military aircraft. How many of those do you buy each year now? 50, 100? The decline has been so great that you cannot even express it in terms of percentages. And it's the same in every field. Every field you care, or almost every field you care to think about. What we see is a quantitative decline, a vast quantitative decline. And I think that is going to continue, if only because the whole thing has, as we all know, become totally unavoidable. Yeah, and then what do we do then? What do we do when the Air Force is reduced to a single aircraft? People have been talking about that for a long time. What do we do when the Navy is reduced to a single carrier? Okay, because things have been moving in that direction. And please don't get angry at me, but it's been happening. I'm just a messenger.
You're stepping on some toes and threatening some what we call rice bowls in America. So I'd like to ask a question about your book, Countering Modern Terrorism. So in your book, you argue large standing armies simply can't win against ill-equipped but agile and highly motivated insurgents. They'll always have the advantage, they'll always win given enough time. So is the Middle East and Central Asia better off or worse off for our coalition forces having been involved in fighting terrorism and insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan?
I don't understand, I'm sorry.
So we've been at war virtually 20 years. First in Afghanistan after the Al-Qaeda attack, and then in Iraq.
Absolutely nothing to show for it as far as I can see. You know, if there's anything that I've missed, I'm sorry, but I cannot see that United States has anything to show for what it has done for so many years in Afghanistan and in Iraq. It's beyond me. How could anyone be so stupid? Okay, and after all, you should have known because you had the experience of Vietnam. You should have known, and there were some people who said so from the beginning. It's not as if everybody was dumb. Okay, how on earth did above all President Bush Jr. right get the United States into this mess? And what is the strangest thing about it is that he himself, as he once said, he said, "We are of the Vietnam generation. We have learned the lessons." And then he did just the opposite. Okay, how could anybody so foolish be so foolish? And what will the long-term outcome for the United States and American power be? Look, many people will say this was the turning point. This is the point at which the United States really lost its soul, okay? And the way I understand it, many people in Beijing think so.
Okay, so my audience has a couple of questions. If we could go a little longer. Sure. I know it's getting rather late for you there in Jerusalem. One question is, he asked if you could describe the non-trinitarian concept that is central to your work. Could you just kind of provide a description of that again for us?
Yes, it's all a matter of perspective, but modern warfare, taking modern as 1648, okay? The Treaty of Westphalia, the beginning of modern, has been waged on the basis of a very, very peculiar, you might say, military political method of organization. War was waged on the basis of a separation between government, whose task was to govern and to conduct the war, the military, which engaged in operations, and the civil population, which paid and suffered. This Trinitarian, as I call it, following Clausewitz, this Trinitarian organization is typical of the modern Western world. You can find, if you really look, some parallels in other places and earlier periods, but basically this separation is typical of the West, characteristic of the West from the Treaty of Westphalia on. Starting in 1945, the separation broke down. Other factors, other players emerged, players that were not states and were not organized on the basis of a separation between a government, because often there was no government, as in Gaza, okay? Between government and armed forces and people, mainly because you couldn't distinguish the forces from the people. They didn't wear uniform. They didn't stand up and salute and say, we are the soldiers, we are going to fight you. The principles were quite different, and all of them were mixed up. And as they say, the proof of the pudding is in eating, okay? God knows how many times those non-trinitarian quote forces, even the word forces is not good enough, okay? Nothing really fits, okay? Organizations, call them what you, as you will. No end of times they faced, as we said earlier, the most powerful military organizations ever seen on this planet, and every time, almost every time they won. Not every time, let's not exaggerate, but most of the time they won, and by winning they changed the color of the planet. I remember the time when I was young, when, you know, I'm old enough to remember this, when the half of the, 1/4 of the world was pink, okay? Now there's a British, of course, and then there was a French, and there was the Russians. And where are those empires? Okay, and they were beaten not by other empires like themselves. They were beaten by non-trinitarian organizations every time, without any exceptions at all. Okay? So something seems to me has fundamentally changed. But it doesn't affect, in yet another way, it doesn't affect the very nature of war. Not, as we say, the uncertainty, not the friction, not the fact that there must be two sides. If there are not two sides, you can have war. Not the not several other aspects of war that are there, have been there, will remain there. And you know, I've tried to write about those too in my book, More on War. Okay, try to identify the things that remain, and above all, the human qualities that you need in order to fight a war, and without which, doesn't matter whether you use swords or lancers or artillery or tanks or missiles, without which you cannot fight a war. And if you don't have those qualities, you're going to lose, regardless of the kind of technology that you use.
Okay, so I have another question. Gentleman asks, how should Special Operations Command be prepared to compete below the threshold of armed conflict? And are we prepared and are we built for that type of conflict below the threshold of open armed conflict?
Look, I don't want to be an advisor to the US Special Forces. Seems to me that, yes, I know you got the best men, let's forget about women for the moment. You've got the best men, you've got the best training, you've got the best technology, and so on and so on and so on. Nobody has what you've got, and yet, look at it, yes, you're only a very small part of it, but since 1945, you have been losing one war for another. Or maybe I should say, since 1945, you've been involved in much larger forces that were losing one war after another. And yes, what do we do about it? What does one do about it? Okay. I can promise you, if I knew, I would tell you. But
You're
then
honest as nothing.
no one would listen. I've got a nice story about that. Back in 1994, the CIA didn't know quite what it was going to do. The Cold War was over. Okay, so what do we do with ourselves? Who needs us? So they asked various people like myself, okay, to write a short paper and give a talk. And I went to Langley and I gave this talk. And I said, the most important danger to the United States is not Russia, it's not China. Nobody thought about those days. It's Mexico. Why Mexico? I said, look at this way. Suppose civil war breaks out in Mexico. And not like today, poor devils, but really hundreds of thousands of refugees come streaming over the border. You can't stop them. And once they are inside the United States, the southwestern United States, they go in camps, of course. Where else would they go? And they start organizing. And once they start organizing and get weapons, they are going to try, some of them at least, are going to try and go back to Mexico in order to influence the war there in their sense, okay? This could literally lead to the disintegration of the United States. This is not something that happens, or in the South China Sea, not something that could happen in Europe. It is something that could happen in the United States itself, okay? No one is ever going to invade the United States. But the United States getting embroiled in a conflict like that and losing control over parts of its territory, yes. Look, for instance, what happened to Pakistan as a result of the war in Afghanistan. Exactly what I've been describing, okay? The whole regions of Pakistan are no longer part of Pakistan. So I argued that was the greatest danger to the United States. And they looked at me and they scratched their heads and they thought, oh, this guy's gone crazy. No.
So let me ask you, given your location in your part of the world in Israel, do you feel like a lone voice crying in the wilderness, like a biblical prophet on this issue? Or do you have any like-minded academics out there who side with you? Do you feel like a lone voice crying in the wilderness? Or
it's not fun. Sometimes it's not fun. Well, I don't want to present myself, as a poor persecuted guy. Sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes it's not fun. But I never really had problems with people who read my military stuff. So they agreed or they disagreed, and that's okay. I really don't take no issue with that at all. If anything, to the contrary, because I like a debate. Where I had problems, and lots of them, as you may know, is everything concerned with the women and feminism. Okay, I've had endless trouble with what I've written about women, about women's history, feminism. I've now been doing it for 20 years. I know about as much about it, I think, as I know about military history. And there I got into real problems. Okay, but never mind that. It's fun to talk about the military. It's not serious. Feminism is much more serious.
no, you're taking your life in your hands there. I said, you're taking your life in your hands there. I'm not going to touch that one. I have a question.
Nobody's going to call rape because you said something about the military.
There's a gentleman from Greece. He says, greetings from Thessaloniki, the second motherland of Israel. I'll let you interpret that however you may. He has a question. He has a question about future military technological partnerships. The United States engages in a lot of foreign military sales. Do you think, do we get a good return on investment when it comes to future or military technological partnerships with other countries?
Uh-huh. Look, there was a time, let me remind you, when you didn't need any partnership. Okay? 1950s, 1960s, other countries had very little, if anything, to offer you technologically speaking. That is no longer true. Even Israel, tiny Israel, you know, this God-forsaken hole in the Middle East with 7 million people has something to offer you, technologically speaking. And that sort of makes you think, where is American military technology superiority gone? What happened to the greatest, mightiest technological colossus that ever existed? Not only what happened, but what could be done about it? What could be done about it to stop this slide into the kind? I honestly don't know. Every time I learn, I read it all happening almost every day. Every day, some Israeli company is being bought by some American company because we've got the technology. It doesn't make sense. Okay, that something is wrong, and specifically that includes military technology, and specifically everything that got to do with computers, intelligence, and so on. Hardly a day passes without it. It makes me very proud as an Israeli, of course. Not to mention the skyscrapers in Tel Aviv. There were no skyscrapers in Tel Aviv when I grew up there. But it really makes you think what has gone wrong. I don't know. Or maybe some people would say nothing has gone wrong. It's all peanuts. I don't know.
Okay, so is there anything you'd like to add? We've been going at it almost 40 minutes, and it's given the lateness of the hour for you there in Jerusalem. Is there anything you'd like to add to our conversation before we end our session?
I just say that I found it very, very interesting. You've made me think, and I enjoy thinking. And I hope I made a few people in the audience think too. And that's all we've really been trying to do, haven't we?
Well, thank you very much. I would like to read our president here at Joint Special Operations University, Dr. Ike Wilson, wanted me to communicate these to you. I think it pretty well captures the sentiments of just about everyone who sat in on the seminar today. He says, on behalf of JSAL and more personally, professionally, thank you for being a formative influence on my development as both a lifelong soldier and scholar. Great session. Thank you, Dr. Ike Wilson. So our president thanks you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Good night.
I'd like to remind the audience, if you found our discussion on strategy and the changing nature of warfare enlightening, please review the variety of JSAL courses offered at several locations throughout the year. Curricula and course dates are available at the JSAL public webpage. Go to socom.mil/JSAL and click on courses. Also take the time to explore JSAL press publications related to this topic. For feedback on Think JSAL or to nominate potential speakers, please contact us at thinkjsal@socom.mil. You can also check out upcoming courses and events on our website, which is www.socom.mil/JSAL. This series is brought to you by the Strategic Studies Department of the Joint Special Operations University. Thank you all for listening.